human body that you'd heard about while growing up. And that list became amazing. There's a lot of information that we're gonna be able to use for future videos. So we decided that we should do one truth and one lie, because some of the things that people mention actually had some truth to them. So today's topics, we're gonna cover what happens when you swallow chewing gum. Does it really stay in your body for over 7 years like some of you have heard about? And is it really more healthy to sleep on the left side of your body? What's the truth? What's the lie? Let's find out. So let's start with my chewed up gum here, and what would happen if this gum got down into the stomach here. Now, to help us with this story, it's going to be very helpful to understand what this stuff is truly made of. Now, most gums have things like sugars, flavoring, artificial sweeteners, and even dyes or colors, so we can have, pretty green, well, that's not a very pretty green color, but green, pinks, reds, and other colors that you've seen in gums. But also, they have something called the gum base. If you were to look at the back of a wrapper or the ingredients of gum, you would see gum base likely on those ingredients. The problem with that is gum base is this umbrella term for multiple ingredients that make up that base that manufacturers don't like to list because apparently they don't want to share their trade secrets on what makes their gum more bubbly or gooey or whatever makes it so great. And so they just say gum base. And the FDA has essentially allowed 40 plus different ingredients to be included under that umbrella of gum base. So what really is the gum base? Generally, the gum base includes things like elastomers, waxes, resins, and even fillers. And that is what gives gum its, stretchy or gooey nature. And I probably should have anticipated being sticky on my gloves, but that's what we need to look at when we're talking about how well does our body break this stuff down. Now, most of the time, we start this story by unwrapping the gum and throwing it into our mouths, or what we like to call the oral cavity in anatomy. So you can see the sagittal cut here. Here's the tongue, and here is the mouth or the oral cavity. Now, some important points or features about this: if we were to get to the lining of the cheek on the other side where I'm sticking the probe, we would see ducts for glands like the parotid gland, which is a salivary gland, which would secrete saliva in here. There's also secretions that would come from salivary glands from underneath the tongue, and that saliva will help to moisturize and even soften whatever we're eating, and even contains enzymes to start breaking things down. Now, that saliva and those enzymes can definitely help with tasting the gum and the flavor, but after a while, we all know that gum loses its flavor, and then it truly feels like you're just munching on rubber. So that saliva and those enzymes don't break down the gum base at all. Now, the other component of digestion in the oral cavity, because if I didn't mention that already, key point, digestion starts in the mouth or the oral cavity, is mechanical digestion, where we chew and break things down. Now, most food does break down a bit when we chew it, but again, gum, we all know the whole point of it is to be able to chew it for prolonged periods of time, and again, doesn't break down that gum base. Now, for most of us, it stops in the oral cavity, and we don't go any further with the story, and we toss the gum in the garbage when we're done with it, and most of us do it because we don't like munching on what feels like rubber. Some of us might be scared that we heard those stories about it could stay in your stomach for over 7 years, and so we're gonna be a little bit adventurous and pretend, what if we did swallow that gum? Then it would move back to what we call the throat or the pharynx, and then down to the food tube or the esophagus here. Now, one thing I need to mention about gum before we go a little bit further into the stomach. Now, we're used to, and it's already happening now, as you can see it's sticking to my gloves, we're used to that when we take this out of our mouth, we've seen it stuck under desks, we've seen it on the ground and accidentally stepped on it, it's impossible to get off your shoes, and it seems like it stays in public wherever it was stuck for time and all eternity. And so we may have this fear, is that gonna happen in our stomachs? But let's take a step back here and just compare the environments. I throw it outside of my mouth, it's no longer coated in saliva or moisture, and then it tends to dry out a little bit and get a little more firm. That isn't gonna happen when we swallow the gum, because as it moves down the esophagus or the food tube here, it's still going to be coated in mucus on its journey to the stomach. So let me show you that as we go on to a different cadaver here. So what you're looking at here is the windpipe or the trachea here, not the food tube, but just a reference here. But here is the rest of the esophagus. You saw the beginning of it again over here on the sagittal head dissection, but we can see that tube coming down like so, and the gum would move down that tube, and eventually, here's the bottom part of the esophagus, get into the stomach. Now, obviously, as we know from the previous part of our story, is the mastication or the chewing and the enzymes in the saliva didn't do anything to break down that gum base. So now let's throw some different things at it and see how we do. Inside the stomach, we've got hydrochloric acid and other enzymes that are going to try to break things down, and typically does a pretty good job at breaking down a lot of the components of food. But what we find out that even those additional enzymes and even the mixing nature of the stomach to mix things up, and even the acid doesn't break it down. And just for good measure, to kind of prove the point, hours ago, prior to starting filming this video, I mixed some hydrochloric acid and diluted it to the same concentration as stomach acid, and then plopped some gum into that mixture to see what it would do, or at least to prove that we know it's not going to break it down. Look at me go. And even hours later, we look at it again, and you can see that it hasn't changed much at all. So let's stop there and just kind of think, okay, so we're seeing that the gum is not breaking down in the mouth, it's not breaking down in the stomach, so now it's going to be stuck there forever. It's never going to get out of there. I'm just going to build up gum in there. If I swallow more than one piece, I'm dead, right? No, that's not what's going to happen here. The stomach has an ability to mix and move and propel things along, and eventually the gum will make it out of the stomach and to the small intestine. And to give you guys a little bit more context on that, I've had patients, typically they're kids, that swallow things they're not supposed to. My latest patient was a 2-year-old who thought he was a hero because he was really proud of himself when I saw him in the clinic, and he swallowed a pendant from a necklace of his mother's. She was not happy about it, but she was also worried. It was almost the size of a quarter. And we did an x-ray and made sure enough, it was down in the stomach. Now, his mom was totally surprised what the next answer was, because she's like, okay, well, what do we do now? And I said to her, well, check his diapers for the next couple days and make sure he passes it. And she looked at me like I was a little bit crazy there. But that's often what happens with certain foreign bodies. As long as we don't have toxic or noxious things like batteries and other things, a lot of times we just let the digestive tract propel it along. And that's what happens with the gum that you swallowed, or the piece that I mentioned that we could have swallowed, comes in here to the small intestines, and we let the small intestines take a crack at it. Because even in the beginning of the small intestines here, there's going to be some secretions that come in from the pancreas and the liver and the gallbladder. The pancreas is going to throw pancreatic enzymes to help digest things, and again, typically does pretty good with food. And the liver and the gallbladder are going to dump in bile. Does the gum even care? Because gum has feelings about this. No, it doesn't at all. The gum just does not get dissolved anymore by the bile or the pancreatic enzymes, because again, that gum base tends to be indigestible. Now, take a minute and just kind of think about this for a second before we get worried about all this gum building up in us. We eat indigestible material all the time. We eat things that are like in our food, you have broccoli, you have vegetables, things like that, things that have high fiber. Fiber is indigestible, and it just propels things along. Anything that ends up in the toilet is essentially indigestible material. So the gum, in essence, is not going to behave any differently. It's just going to move right along through the small intestine, probably mixed with some other food here. I'm just going to slide this over so you guys can see more here. and we come up through the small intestine, and it's going to zigzag all through the 20 feet of the small intestine, not being absorbed because it's indigestible, and essentially, if it's not digestible, we can't bring it into the bloodstream, and then eventually it'll make it to the colon. And once we get into the colon, and we've been in the colon, well, not we, but the food necessarily, because if we were in there, that'd be a really bad environment, because this is where essentially you create poop, or we can be a little more professional and say feces or stool, but again, that's coming down, and it would mix with that waste, and eventually make it out of the human body. Now, that'll take anywhere from 2 to 3 days for that to happen, depending on what you've been eating and things like that, and digestive rates and motility rates, but again, should have no problem making it to the toilet. But there's always a but, and there's always exceptions. That is just swallowing one piece of gum here and there. Typically, no big deal. What if you swallowed multiple pieces per day? I've come across case studies where pediatric patients or little kids swallowed multiple pieces, or whenever they had gum, they would eventually swallow it rather than spit it out. There's particular case studies where kids would swallow anywhere from 5 to 10 pieces per day. Now, in that case, it can start to build up because you're getting too much of it in there. And there's other cases where we swallow indigestible material. For example, I know we all don't like to think about this, we've all swallowed hairs here and there, and tends to not have a big deal when we swallow small amounts of hairs, or every so often. But there are psychiatric disorders where people will eat their hair and they'll get what's called a bezoar or trichobezoar, which is a buildup of hair. And when you take them out, sometimes they look like they're the shape of the actual, here it is, the shape of the actual stomach. And those bezoars have to be removed if they build up too much. So in certain cases, extreme cases of swallowing multiple pieces of gum, you can get gum bezoar. And that could be a problem if it causes an obstruction and a buildup. So in general, what do we take home from this? Is it true that gum will stay in your system for 7 years? No, it will not, unless we have some of these extreme examples. That doesn't mean I say swallow your gum. I would still recommend spitting it out. But if you had an occasional accident here and there where you swallowed it, not too big of a deal. So that takes care of our first topic in the truth versus lie. And yes, technically it is a lie or inaccurate to say that gum is going to stay in the stomach for over 7 years. So does that mean that really sleeping on the left side of your body is going to create health benefits? Well, we have to look at that within certain situations or within context, because just generally sleeping on the left side of your body is going to magically create all these health benefits. But in say like a situation with acid reflux, or what a lot of people just refer to as heartburn, then we can see some potential benefits. Now, for those of you who have not experienced heartburn, that is when acid from the stomach regurgitates or refluxes and moves up the esophagus, which is in the center of the chest behind the heart, hence the nickname heartburn. And that acid is irritating to the esophagus. So here's the idea. The stomach sits about like so on the left side of the body here, and you can see that curvature. If I can get my fingers on it, I'll show you on the lower camera here, like so. So if you were to sleep on your left side, it would tilt this curvature towards the bed, and then the esophagus right here would actually be a little bit higher, and the idea is that the gravity would help keep the acid down in this portion of the curvature and slow it, or at least help prevent it sliding up the esophagus than say if you were just sleeping on your back. The problem with that is if you're anything like me, and you start on your left side, you could wake up in a completely different position later in the middle of the night, especially if you're having, say, like a nightmare from like the scariest thing on planet Earth, which by the way is Pennywise the Dancing Clown from Stephen King, It's movies or books. I digress, but regardless, you can have this idea where you're moving around, and so you might get a benefit for a little while, and then you toss and turn and go to the other side, or lay on your back. And so that is why instead of recommending laying on your left side, say like patients or medical professionals recommending to their patients, they would say, raise the head of the bed. In other words, they have patients put blocks on the back, 2 legs of the bed, or the legs that are at the head of the bed, that are say like 6 to 8 inches high, and that way the bed slightly tilts. So that no matter if you're on your left side, your right side, or your back, that would help keep the acid from coming up into the esophagus. Now, if you want more information on that, we have a really cool YouTube video for 2 reasons. Justin, one, does a really good job explaining acid reflux, and so we'll put a link to that. But he also looks like he did the video by just rolling out of bed. So you'll have fun being able to make fun of him in the comments as an added benefit. The other situation where you could see a potential benefit from sleeping on your side is during pregnancy, especially towards the end of the 2nd trimester and into the 3rd, as the uterus enlarges as well as the fetus, and laying on the back could compress vasculature or blood vessels. For example, there is a huge vein called the inferior vena cava that runs close to the spine, and it drains blood from the lower limbs and the pelvis. And if that were to get slightly compressed from the fetus and the uterus, that could decrease blood flow back to mom's heart and overall decrease the general circulation, and eventually even maybe affect the circulation back to the fetus. So the idea is sleep on the side, and that would take the pressure off of that posterior vasculature. Now, in that case, it doesn't necessarily have to be the left side or the right side, so this is a little bit of a stretch when we're talking about a total truth or a total lie, but one side or the other could be beneficial. Now, I've never been pregnant, so I'm not about to tell a mother in her 2nd and 3rd trimester totally how to sleep. But, we can get those benefits left versus right, and it may improve the circulation and help mom be a little bit more comfortable during that pregnancy. Jeffrey and I want to take the time to say thank you for watching this video. Just getting to this point in the video helps the YouTube algorithm show it to more people, and getting more eyes on this content will help more people learn about this amazing machine that we call the human body. If you want to further support us, consider engaging the motor cortex in the frontal lobe of your brain so it can send a signal down to your forearm and hand muscles, so that you can click the like, subscribe button, and maybe even leave some comments about what you might like to see in the future and what you thought of this video. We've also got our anatomy t-shirts as well as our anatomical artwork that you can help support the channel with, and I think that concludes all of my shameless plugs for this video. We'll see you next time.
Until 2016, Counter-Strike majors only had a total prize pool of $250,000. And then from 2016 till 2019, that was up to $1 million. For the 2020 Rio Major, this was increased to $2 million. But COVID cancelled that event, which is why the upcoming PGL Major is the first time a Counter-Strike tournament has had a prize pool as big as $2 million. This will be split unevenly between the 16 top teams in the tournament, with the grand winner getting to take home $1 million. That's a lot of money. But remember, it isn't this simple. A Counter-Strike team isn't just one person. There are 5 players, plus other people like the manager, and then there's the organisation itself, which likely takes a cut as well. So it's not like the prize money is cleanly divided between the players participating in it. And I'm pretty sure each and every team has a different way of doing things. It's not something I know much about, and I'm not going to speculate. And then, to further complicate matters, is the stickers. You know all those pick'em things that get added to the game in the lead up to every major event, where you can buy stickers and bet on which teams you think will win rounds? 50% of all money spent on this goes towards the teams and organisations taking part in the major, so that will further boost how much everybody gets. How much buy? Apparently it can vary quite substantially. In the worst case, a sticker can earn a player less than $10,000. The best case I've heard is from the team stickers, which could bring in perhaps $250,000 or so, but that is of course shared between everybody involved. But this does mean that sticker income is a bigger earner for most teams in a major than the prize money is. I just need to make all this clear, because I don't want you going away from this video thinking that prize money is all that matters, and it's what's keeping the competitive scene afloat. Prize money is just the tip of a very deep, very thick iceberg. And also remember that this is just one major event. There are usually several of these a year, in addition to hundreds of other smaller tournaments that teams can also enter. And then on top of that, teams are paid salaries and all sorts. So this is all obvious stuff, but even I'm guilty of looking at the prize pool and thinking that that's all there is to it. So I got all this prize information from Wikipedia, which I will say is a lifesaver. What an excellent online resource for anybody even remotely interested in the esports side of things, for any competitive game with a major following that you can think of. And Artifact. I also visited Esports Earnings, which tries to list all tournaments by their prize pool, and again I found it to be very interesting. Dota 2 dominates the top of the list on this site, then Fortnite, then numerous others including League of Legends and Rainbow Six. CSGO doesn't even make an appearance until number 61, and this wasn't even a major. Global Offensive has actually had several tournaments in the past with prize pools greater than $1 million, though none as big as $2 million.